You're not safe.
Yeah, he does. And I actually just got Tula died. Was a friend of his. Talks a lot about it. He actually dated my grandmother.
Really?
Which friend wasn't Bill Lake and Tucker.
I'm the chair of the Elgin Area Heritage Society, and several months ago we had an inspiration in our board to develop and put together this exhibit. And here today you see the results of many people working to create this exhibit and many people sharing. Ellswood Rosewell of Chafee's Locks survived the Battle of Vimy Ridge. And looking back down the blood-soaked ridge after it was taken with over 10,000 Canadian casualties, what a victory, he said, but at what a cost. It's a very solemn occasion when we gather together today to remember this, and our desire is that history doesn't repeat itself. So this is partly the reason why we do this as well. Today in peace we gather to recall these people, their dedication, and I have here a letter from the Governor-General of Canada, the Right Honourable David Johnston. It is a solemn responsibility for me to mark the 100th anniversary of the beginning of the First World War. When war broke out in Europe in August 1914, many people expected the conflict to be over by Christmas. That the war to end all wars, as it became known, continued for more than 4 years at a cost of an estimated 8.5 million soldiers killed, as well as tens of millions wounded physically and mentally, helps to explain why the world pledged never again after the armistice on November the 11th, 1918. Signed, David Johnson, 2014. We're honored today to have a number of speakers to help us with this commemoration, and I'd like to introduce our first speaker today, MPP Steve Clark.
Thank you, Jane. Platform guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a real honor to be here in Elgin at this very historic venue to pay tribute to those in North Leeds who have bravely responded when the call of duty came from their nation. I want to also extend my thanks to the Elgin and Area Heritage Society members for their very hard work in organizing this special remembrance presentation and for asking me to be a part of it, so I want to thank you. As I mentioned, men and women from North Leeds communities like Elgin, Westport, Portland, and Newborough have always been, and were proud then, to serve Canada for the fight for freedom. And we're here today during this 100th anniversary of the First World War to commemorate this area's role in that terrible conflict. We must also recognize that our sons and daughters from North Leeds and from across all corners of this great riding continue as well to serve as members of Canada's armed forces today. And I'm just always amazed at how much work you've done, how far we've progressed, and I know that I'll be back again to see the next level of progression. So thank you all for coming.
Clark, our second speaker today is no stranger, the mayor of the Township of Rito Lakes, Ron Holman.
Well, thank you very much, Jane, and MP Steve, veterans, members of the Elgin and Area Heritage Society, members of those in the services today. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to be here, and certainly to bring greetings on behalf of my colleagues both at the county and at the Township of Rito Lakes. It's certainly a time of year when it certainly brings forward a lot of memories and a lot of history comes forward, which we should all appreciate, and in many cases we take for granted, but we shouldn't. The events of recent weeks certainly have rekindled, I believe, the interest in our history and for the remembrance of our veterans and those who served today. And it's certainly encouraging to hear on the newspaper and on the radio and TV that the poppy sales have just increased something fantastic this year. I believe it's setting a record all over, and I think I heard this morning on TV that they've raised the amount of, I think it's 35 million poppies they expect to sell this year. So that's really fabulous. And it's, certainly everybody's to be congratulated on that initiative. Today we are sitting where a piece of World War I unfolded.
About the history of the red brick schoolhouse and the role of the township at that time.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's certainly an honor to be asked by the Heritage Society to come out and present this commemoration. My involvement with the commemoration is twofold. As the last free of the former municipality of South Crosby, which is now part of Rito Lakes Township, but more pertinently, I am part of the warp and weft in the rich tapestry of this community. My father, Alfred Sly, had been a member of the North Leeds section of the 156th Leeds Grenville Battalion. And his voyage to England on a boat, now I don't think it was the same boat that you were mentioned about, however, was apparently torpedoed, and they were in the Atlantic overnight in lifeboats and was picked up at daybreak the next day and brought back to Halifax to a hospital and spent 3 days for treatment for hypothermia. And then after 3 days they were sent back to England. The surroundings of South Crosby School, section number 5, in which we hold this commemoration event, form part of the training area for this group. The school, which is the pride of the village, had been constructed 25 years earlier in a portion of the village which offered ideal space for the forthcoming military exercises. Elgin was likely chosen as a location for training for the availability here of accommodation for the recruits. Also, it was the home of Lieutenant Harry Gus Coon, who had volunteered to take command of these soldiers. You will be able to identify him in the various photos which we were taken at this location. Gus had grown up in Elgin in what is today called the Guthrie House, where his father was a local doctor. This large lot, which is the school and the schoolyard, had been purchased from Philip Holliday, with the adjacent land converted to a rifle range in 1915. One can imagine the excitement and curiosity of the students as the scholars of the day yearned to hear and see what was happening outside. The men assembled in Elgin from the surrounding area, arriving by foot, by horse, by train, buggies, and cutters in the winter for 3 days a week training. They had been issued with a Ross 303 rifle, one which would create quite a noise and distraction every training day for the students in this school. Numerous photographs of the time showing the men marching on the school grounds to the accompaniment of 3 drummers and 4 buglers. In fact, Arthur Cooper's bugle is on display here today at the back. Throughout the late fall of 1915, the winter of 1916, and until the summer of 1916, by which time, when the battalion had departed, the school grounds resonated with the reverberations from the rifle training and marching, all of which would certainly have attracted the attention of the enclosed students. We can visualize the number of heads peeping out the windows. Incidentally, the number of available Ross rifles was limited. This number was outstripped by the growing presence of new recruits. Many of the photographs taken around the school shows men without firearms. These weapons would have been issued to the men on the rifle range, with all rifles and ammunition being stored in the Old Orange Hall, located between the United Church and the bowling alley, I guess, should be. Incidentally, the wedding dinner for my wife Sheila and I was held in the Orange Hall. As for a while, the bottom floor was rented by the United Church as their hall. And in 1915, a further use of the Orange Hall was as a dormitory for all these new men in town. By the fall of 1916, the Red Brick School and its students had returned to being the quiet seat of learning that it had been previously. The students left with memories and stories in the years to come of the excitement on the school grounds created by the young men of North Leeds section of the 156th Battalion. As years passed, SS number 5 became redundant. It was a senior center and a canteen for the adjacent rink. Slowly it sank into a state where demolition became the likely option. Out of fear of this possibility arose the Elgin and Area Heritage Society with the intention to restore the stately structure and again to make it a focal point of this village. That is how you see it today. Again, the center point of this commemoration event. Along with the rejuvenation of the school is a vision by the Elgin and Area Heritage Society to make the adjacent training ground a village park dedicated to the memory of these men. So, 100 years later, we sat here surrounded by echoes of this long, long time period when young men marched on the grounds of the Red Brick School, and some never to return, but the lives of all changed drastically.
Let me hear you whisper that goes to bed. Oh, 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 it's a lovely war.
It's a lovely war.
What do we want with eggs and ham?
When we got one and apple jam.
Our wars right turn. How do we spend the money we earn? Oh, 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 it's a lovely war.
Thank you very much for that musical interlude. It really touches one and it leads well into our next speaker. Letters from home and letters to the front were very important, and they bring us a reality, just as Bruce Cooper's presentation at the back did, and the nurses and the Eva Kuhn's information at the back tell us about the reality that's there. So I'd like to welcome Sue Warren to speak about that now and read letters from her grandfather.
I'm going to start off with a quote from Granite Stein's book, The Greatest Victory. And it speaks about the last 100 days of the war, which were among the most fiercely fought and difficult. And it was a period my grandfather was involved in. Arthur Currie had headed up the Canadian troops. And in 1919, he wrote to the Empire Club in Toronto, "We picture war as a business of banners flying, men smiling full of animation, guns belching forth, and all that sort of thing. One somehow or other gets the impression that there's a great deal of glory and glamour about the battlefield. I never saw any of it. I want you to understand that war is a cursed butchery, and the men who've gone through it, who've seen war stripped of all its trappings, are the last men that will ever want a war." Herman Warren, my grandfather, and there's actually some people in the room that knew Hermy, was born in 1888 at Clear Lake in the Crosby area. He was a fifth generation South Crosby resident on his dad's side and fourth on his mom. She was a Rosewell from Clear Lake. Hermy was educated at the Woodchuck School and left at the age of 12 to become a plowboy. He didn't have any shoes, and he wanted to make some money to get a pair of boots. So he worked for a family near Forfar, and he did get his boots, and he went on for many years and did many different things. He was a helmsman on the Great Lakes. He worked at the Kingston Tannery. He was a horse whisperer in northern New York State. But by 1916, Herm was working at the cheesebox factory in Newborough, where his parents had relocated. And he was driving cheese boxes all over this whole area of North Leeds. So he got to meet a lot of, shall we say, girls. He was a bit of a ladies' man. Her family were the Bars, Stinsons, and Thompsons, who'd been up in that area for generations as well. Her father, however, had come directly from Ireland and married in his late 40s. She was born to her mother when her mother was 48 years old. And by the time she was in her 20s, her father was getting close to 80-something, and her mother was over 60. So she was a baby of quite a large family. Alice left school at the age of 12 or 13, worked out as a hired girl all over the mountain and for families in Westport. She would farm herself out for a few months and then come home. She was quite a home girl. She loved the home. And in the letters, there are a couple of people mentioned. One is her brother Billy, the only boy out of 7 girls and spoiled rotten. And he was also sent overseas as well. They met in 1916. Alice and her sister Rebecca, who they called Ray, were walking down the mountain, and Herm was driving some cheese boxes, and she caught his eye. They started dating quite heavily, or what they call in those days, they were being pals. And they talk about being pals and beaux and this sort of thing quite often. They did a lot of rides out in the woods. I won't go into what happened on the rides. Lots of skating, lots of church socials. Alice, they got engaged very quickly, probably about the middle of 1916, and Alice broke it off. Herm started getting letters from an old girlfriend called Loretta, and she was very upset about this, and she broke off their engagement. He also liked to drink whiskey, and she was a teetotaler, and that was an issue. However, they continued to go out, and then the bigger picture. August of 1917, Robert Borden, the Prime Minister of Canada, was being pressured by the British authorities for more soldiers. We had already had, I think they were pushing for an enrollment of 500,000 Canadian soldiers. They'd had many who had volunteered and who had died in the blood fields of Passchendaele and Vimy. By about 1916-17, the enthusiasm was wearing off, and a lot of people weren't enlisting. So they introduced something called the Military Service Act in August of 1917. All men between 22 and 45 had to go to a draft board and register. And many people don't realize there was a draft that was active in the last year and a half of the First World War. They were threatened with 5 years of hard labor if they didn't sign up. And many of them were terrified. And Grandpa even talks about some of them running off and trying to hide. There was a lot of anger among the farmers and the French Canadians in particular, because they promised not to draft farmers' sons, and they were. And you'll notice in the people that fought, there were some that were draftees, and Herm was one of the draftees. There were riots in Quebec over this particular issue, and what Borden did was he formed what they called the Union Government, which was a combination of the Liberals and Conservatives, and they ran on the election platform of the Military Service Act. And by December of 1917, all the registered guys, the Union won, and they were shipped to war. There were approximately 125,000 Canadian men registered, and 25,000 were shipped overseas, and Herm was one of them. So we're just going to go to some of the letters, the build-up, and I'm going to just put this over here for a minute, and we'll start October 18th, 1917. He was still in Newborough. He was still driving his boxes around. Herm, I'll remind you, had a grade 5 education, but he was a pretty eloquent writer, considering. The spelling was atrocious. Hello, pal. And how goes it anyhow? Well, I thought it was about time I'd be hearing from you, but no letter yet. I've looked around till my eyes are sore. What's wrong? Have you forgotten me altogether? I guess maybe you have, so I thought I'd write and tell you that I'm still alive. I've been awful lonely all week, and no letter to cheer me up. I thought for sure I'd get one tonight and was awful disappointed when there weren't any. You must be awful busy when you don't have time to write. Well, dear girl, I'm going down to Brockville on Saturday to be examined. Tobin and I and the 3 McCarthy lads are all going down in their car Saturday morning, and I'll send you a big long letter Sunday and tell you how I got along. William Blaze was down today and bothered, and believe me, he's feeling pretty blue over it, and Johnny Coburn was down and passed first class, and Harry Blair is in C class, and you tell Bill, who is her brother, not to wait too long, for the board closes on the 10th of November, and anyone that isn't examined by the 10th is put in prison for 5 years hard labor. Well, I guess I've told you enough about that. We'll talk about something else now. Okay, we'll end there. He always signs the letters S-W-A-S-K. Any guesses? You got it. Okay, we'll look at the next entry here. Hello, Alice. This is October 23rd. And how are you feeling tonight? Well, no doubt you think I have it bad when I'm writing so often. Dear, I got examined yesterday and stood the test. Fine, A11. That means the first draft. Too bad, but I guess it's my luck, or else I wouldn't have been A11. But we don't have to put on the suit until the 10th of December, so I have a little longer to myself, and maybe I won't have to put on the uniform at all. My boss is going to put in an exemption tomorrow, and then it'll be a week or so before I know whether I'll be exempt. There was 5 of us, A11. That means A1 men. The only difference is that one has to be a trained soldier to be A1. Well, we had a hell of a time yesterday. We went to the Opry last night and didn't get home until 5:30 in the morning. And I slept until 7 and then went to work, and believe me, I'm some sleepy tonight. Okay. page 21. I'll just go to here. So he's getting geared up here, and they're talking a little bit about some of the other draftees. Your letter received tonight, all okay, and I was awful glad to know you're well, but poor little me, I ran a nail into my foot today, and I have a sore foot. It's all I can do to walk. Don't you feel for me? Well, so your brother got A11, some man, eh? Well, I don't know any more about mine, but all the boys around here is getting exempted. But they're putting in those in Westport. Win Blair and Everett Haskin and Bill Chulov didn't get exempted. So they have to go. It'll be a hard thing for Everett to go and leave his little wife behind him, ha. What do you think? I wish my letter would come so I would know if I were going to be exempted. I tell you, Mother's feeling blue over it. William Breckovich got exempted for a year. Win Blair is feeling kind of sore over it, and you can't blame him much. Okay, December 1917, there's a lot of Billy Doos and a big fight at Christmas because he drank too much and insulted her mother, etc. But they did get engaged in December of 1917. Borden won the election, and Laurier, of course, was on the other side. And Mr. Clark, Herm never did vote Conservative again. It was, they were a little ticked off about this. So anyway, they got engaged. Right after Christmas, it was official, they were engaged. Alice got a beautiful scarf and some oranges, and she was all warm and fuzzy, and then Herm got shipped off to Kingston. Here he is, January 13th, 1918 in Kingston. Hello, Alice. Hello, sweetheart. Here I am to say hello, and how are you feeling? Anyway, well, I hope well. I got here last night, and believe me, it's someplace. Bill's here too. I'm going to stay in Kingston to train. They're going to send me to Belleville, but I asked to train in Kingston, and they let me stay. I wish you were here. I was out the afternoon till 12 last night. We get every Saturday afternoon off. I'm so lonesome for my pal. I guess we'll be here about 6 months. Say, Alice, I don't get any pass for 5 weeks, and then I get a pass for 2 weeks. Well, dear girl, I haven't seen anyone here I like better than you, and I don't think I will. All I want is your love, so don't get tired waiting and loving someone else. We don't get much to eat, only what we buy, and they make us sleep on a blanket on board so far, but I guess I'll have to get some straw. My back's good and sore. Private Herman Warren, 2nd Company Depot Battalion, Dry Dock Barracks, Kingston. So he goes on, he's training, he's learning to shoot rifles, etc., etc. And here's just another little bit about drilling. Gee, but the name Alice sounds sweet to me and reminds me of olden times. Just got your letter today. I've been inoculated. He was inoculated, and I'm not training today, so I thought I'd write my dear girl. I hope I'll be able to come back to you again and have those old times once more, for I'm so lonesome. But I guess, dear Alice, that as soon as I go overseas, we'll never see each other again. But I hope, dear pal, that you'll never forget me. As soon as I'm gone, don't commence going with someone else. Like all the rest does, for you know I love you with all my heart. They picked a bunch of us today, and I guess we're overseas in a week or so, and they won't give any of the boys a pass home. All of them went on Saturday, didn't get a chance to go home, and 3 of them skipped away. So I guess if we see each other before I go, I'll have to come in, or you'll have to come in. Bill has just gone down and got the separation allowance made over to you, and when you get it, take it before a lawyer and have him fix it up for you. That's again her brother Bill. So, Herm, shortly thereafter, let's see, page, February 16th. Well, suddenly, Herm's on his way, 3 Rivers. And this is written on brown Canadian National Railroad paper. Hello, sweetheart. Here I am today, someplace towards Halifax. We've been lying here since 6 o'clock this morning. There are 3 trainloads of soldiers beside us. There's a train wreck ahead. That's why we're here so long. Well, Alice, we're a long piece apart, but my thoughts are of you.
It's hard for me to write in the crowd jamming around, but I'll do my best and I'll write you again as soon as I get to the journey's end. I wish I could have seen you before I went away, but they wouldn't let me go and they shifted us without telling us. It was a sad sight in Kingston yesterday when they loaded 500 of us on the train, and I hope someday I'll get back to see you. Tell Bill that Charlie beaded it out. There isn't one here on this train. I'm all alone and I wish I were coming back now and I'd be awful happy. With all my love from Herm, my dear heart, loves and kisses, Swask. Well, Herm's on his way. We don't hear from him again until he arrives in March in England. Dear sweetie, and how's my Alice? Feeling good, and I suppose, well, dear pal, we landed at port, and believe me, it was some trip. We were 11 days coming across the ocean, and a dandy weather, but awful cold. We were 18 days from the time we left Kingston till we landed here, and we're now resting up for a couple of days. Then I'll have to go to work. As soon as we are here, 10 days, we get 6 days leave, and I'm going to Glasgow to see some of them Scotch girls, ha ha ha. Haven't seen any yet, guess they all cleared out to France. Well, dear, it seems like it's like summer here. So Herm got us leave, and he was stationed in a place called Seaforth. And Seaforth was in Sussex, and there were up to 30,000 soldiers in camp at any given time. What did he do in Seaforth? Well, some of it wasn't that highly romantic. They kept getting mumps and getting quarantined in their huts. And they just get one soldier through the mumps and another group of soldiers that get the mumps. And this went on for quite a while. Herm got all kinds of training. He learned about bomb throwing. He got sniper training. They had gas chambers, and they ran the boys through the gas chambers. And Fred Varley, who was with the group of 7, has an amazing painting that shows the gas chambers for training at Seaforth, and there's this big cloud of yellow smoke over this beautiful seacoast in England. I'll just read you a couple of excerpts from when he was in camp. May 19th. I will have some feed when I get them. Well, dear, how's Bill? I suppose he'll be called up. There's 3,000 over here in the same camp with us. There's so many they don't know what to do with them. We're on the range now shooting. We don't have it as near as hard as we did when we were all through training for the soldier. Now, Alice, they don't belong making soldiers out of one over here. There's a new bunch from Kingston here training now. I don't know where Bill Truelove is staying. And if you notice, Bill Truelove was killed, and he's one of the men mentioned in that list over there. He also dated Alice before Herm did, so there's a little send me his address and I'll try and find him. Young Friedenberg from Westport's here. He's a sergeant now, and some get to see him quite often. I think I'll try and get to be one. Well, dear, not much news around here. There was another lad shot himself the other morning, just a couple of huts from us, while we were out on PT. He was going on draft that night. What happened was some of the soldiers were shooting themselves so they wouldn't have to go out on draft. It's rather sad, but they were frightened. Well, dears, how's Delbert and Carrie? Tell them to write once and tell Charlotte I'll come home next fall to help her cut up the wood. That is, if I don't get lost in France. I'm a pretty good shot now. Tell Bill I think I could hit a sparrow now with his rifle. Well, Alice, you better come over here and keep me from being lonesome. You're the only one who ever could. I'm going down to the seashore this afternoon to hunt for shells. May 26th. Well, Alice, here I am again. Hello, and how's my Alice? Well, I hope I am well, but am as mad as a wet hen. What do you think? We were to get out of quarantine this week and go and pass, and another guy took the mumps this morning, and we're up again for 28 days. I feel like drowning myself. Well, dear, what time did you have on the 24th of May? We were out over doing sports here. There were 5,000 people out, and most were soldiers, but the sports weren't much. Say, Alice, I ain't got any mail in a couple of weeks. Do you ever miss me and old Joe? That was the horse last summer. I miss you more than I ever did. They've gone after dinner now, so they go for a big feed of rabbit. Well, here again, I'm again to finish. Well, Alice, I feel fine, but I won't eat any rabbit. Oh, say, Alice, I haven't found Billy Truelove. You sent me his address. I might be able to find him. I guess you have his address. Haven't you? Ha ha. Well, dear, I've had letters from all my boy chums. So he continued in camp for a little bit longer. Just another very quick one. A little bit bitter here about, say, Alice, here's a piece of heather I'm sending to you. Try to keep it. Well, Alice, I'd love to be home with you today so I could have a good dinner. We always get rabbit on Sundays, and I won't eat it. I can't do anything like that. How's Billy? Has he got to come over? I suppose Ernie's gone by this time. I'm glad he had to come and win Blair and those damn guys that voted for the union government. I love to see them get it rubbed in real good. How does all those old farmers feel about their boys now? Pretty sore, I suppose. Say, Alice, there's a fellow here by the name of Bennett from Burridge. I suppose you know him. Say, how about Earl Sweet? Has he got to come? I hope so. It'll break Loretta's heart if he comes away. I would like to be here when they come over, but I'll be in France by the time they get here. Tell Bill that if he comes to let me know, and I'll try and get him in our company. Well, we're getting near action now. July 31st, 1918. There's sport this afternoon and we won't work. We got one holiday every week, every Wednesday, but we won't be here long. Maybe by the time you get this, I'll be in France. They're talking about calling us up on draft tomorrow. So we'll soon be at work on the lines, and I'll be glad when we get out of here. And 1,000 more came from Canada, some bunch. We have to eat in our huts here. There isn't room in the mess room. You can see there's a big bunch over here, and they keep coming all the time. I ain't seen any of the fellows yet, I know. In fact, they're all over at the North Camp yet. They don't get over here until after. They're a short distance from them, but we're not allowed to go see them on account of being quarantined. This is the last day of July. I suppose you'll be picking berries. August 1st. Hello, honey dear. Well, Alice, I'm sick today and thought I'd write to you to tell you I saw Billy and had a big long talk with him and saw a lot of the boys, Earl Hutchings and Herbie Nail and Johnny Monty, and believe me, they were all tickled to meet. I'm not doing anything now. I was wrestling last night, got my back hurted so I can't walk. I can walk, but slow. Bill's doing fine. I'm going to spend the evening with him. Well, dear Alice, all our company went on draft today, but me and a couple of the men were held back on account of me hurting my back. So it'll be a while before I get to see Franz. I'm going to take another machine gun course as soon as I get better. But don't worry, there's no danger of Bill seeing the front. Well, dear, I suppose you're good and lonesome for Billy, but don't be, for things keep on going as they are now. The war will be over soon, and then we'll be home together. Gee, I wish it was now we were going. I'd be the most tickled boy you'd ever see. You can imagine how I felt when I saw the lads. I was hallooed with joy, and they hallooed back. They all flocked around me like a bunch of sheep. It was a surprise, for I didn't intend that they were over here. And Alice, do you remember Wes Bottom? He's here. Didn't do him much good to get married. Don't you wish that you'd married me? He's putting the rush on her here. August 11th. Hi, sweetie. How's Alice? Well, I hope I'm awful lonesome. Most of my pals have gone to France. Same old story. Haven't done much else but sleep. Oh, say we had Sir Robert Borden over here today to see us, and he presented a lot of medals. All of us had to go on parade, 8,000 of us. Say, I suppose you got the letter I wrote to tell you I saw Billy. I'm going to see him tonight. Well, dear, the next time you hear from me, I'll be in France, so don't worry and be a good girlie. And then I'll come home and I'll make you really happy. Leave that there. Moving along. So, suddenly, I'll just read a little poem. He found out he was shipping out. I suppose this week, darn glasses. I suppose next week I'll know something about real warfare, and I won't like it either. I was over and bid Billy and the rest of the boys goodbye. And then he sends a poem. When the golden sun is sinking in your mind, from care is free, and of your old pals you are thinking, try and think of me. Swask, Herm to Alice. On the back of the letter, I'm carrying your picture close to my heart, the one that you and Ray and the rest I sent home. And then he writes Swask again on the envelope. August 22nd. Well, dear, I thought I'd drop you a few lines. I'm well and hope you're the same. Say, Alice, send the rest of the mail to the Princess Pat's, France. Just put my name and number the PPCLI battalion. I'll get it all right. Be sure and write as soon as you get this, and I'll write as often as I can. He, a lot of his letters by this time have big pieces taken out by the censors. And all the letters went through censors because they couldn't say anything about where they were in terms of, military strategy and so on. So he had to be very vague once he got over to France. He was involved in the Canal du Nord battle. There were several battles during that period. It was very intense fighting, although you don't get much of a picture of that because the letters had to be censored. He started on August 23rd and he went until October 1st. He was wounded on September 30th. There were 11,000 casualties in that 5-week period. So he saw a lot of very rough action. But you don't get that picture from the letters. As I say, they're being pretty censored. Say, Alice, I was up and had supper with a nurse from home, one that's over here for 3 years, Belle Kennedy from Forfar, and she gave me 100 cigarettes, a lot of cake, and a big bunch of grapes. Gee, but it's nice to have a pal from home. She's a lieutenant now and busy all the time. And I got a kick out of this because they mentioned Ellswood Rosewell, and he turns up. He was Grandpa's first cousin. Hello, sweetie. How are you today? Suppose most of the hot weather's over there, but it's hot enough over here by times. Some hot place. Well, Alice, I saw Ellswood Rosewell today. You remember him from Fermoy. He said he knew you anyhow. He and I had a big, long talk. I'm beginning to see some of the old pals, and it's nice to meet them. Don't worry about that nurse I was talking about. She's only a friend. I knew one time, but she won't take the place with me. I'd be an awful liar. September 7th. Hi, Alice. Hope's all well. I wasn't very busy today, so I found time to drop you a few lines. Well, I talked to Ellswood Rosewell, and he told me he knew where Billy Truelove was. Billy Truelove died 2 weeks later. Said about 100 yards from me the other day, but I didn't get time to go see him. He's in the 1st section in 7th Brigade. Going over to see him as soon as I get a chance. I suppose you know where he is. He used to be your pal, didn't he? Ha ha. Ha ha. All the bunch that came over with Truelove is all gone, except him, I guess, and Rosewell. Well, I sure wish this war was over with so I could get back to you. Things carry on the way they are now, we'll be home. Well, let's be sure and write often. And he starts talking about getting shipments of boxes and stuff. Another letter, he's sitting on a German gun box, and he's writing the letter to her. I'm getting steady down so I can sleep good. Say, when you're over here, you can't sleep much. Well, dear, I guess I'll close, thanking you for the box you sent me, and sometime maybe I'll be able to do as much for you. Say, Alice, I'm using a German box to write on, a box belonging to a German machine gun. September 21st. Hi, sweetie. Well, dear, seeing I wasn't very busy today, I thought I'd drop a few lines to tell you I'm still alive. Got your 2 letters a couple of days ago, and believe me, they cheered me up. We're getting rotten weather here. Now, say, Alice, I don't know how to write a letter. For where I am, we don't get much news at all. Same old thing. I could tell you a lot, but it wouldn't do. We have to be careful what we write. We mustn't write anything about military works. So all you see is we don't see anything else. Once in a while, we go through a little town or city of some sort. That's all one ever sees. I've seen a few guys from home, I know, but very few. We don't see papers. And once in a while, I suppose you hear from Bill. How does he like it in England? As well as I did, haha, but I don't think he'll like France much either. I guess maybe I'll see Rosewell tonight. Wow, dear, this won't be a long letter, and I don't know. It's a dull rainy day. It rains so easily over here. Do you ever go down to the port? That's Westport at all now. I suppose it's the same old place. I wish I could be there today and I'd take a quick trip over the mountain. October 8th. Just a little background. Herm was in the Princess Pax. He was involved in the Battle du Nord. It was fought heavily between September 27th and October 1st of 1918. They went down from a battalion, which was 300 to 800 men, down to about 120. There were 356 casualties in one day, and Herm was one of them. They were trying to capture a little town called Tilroy, which was just on the outskirts of Cambrai. And Herm was machine gunned by a sniper. He was hit by a sniper out of a church tower, and I found the actual church he was shot from. It went down this way, I believe. No, it went right under his eye. He almost lost his eyesight. Went out, took all his teeth out. He was rendered deaf for the rest of his life. He never really heard properly again, and he couldn't hear birds. He couldn't hear the boats. When he worked on the canal, Alice had to sit up all night and listen for the boats to honk. He was his face was badly scarred and disfigured, and he was concerned about that. And you'll hear this a bit. I'm not going to read too many more, but I'll just mention it. His hand was hit twice, and his fingers, they had to break his hand 3 times and reset it. He was pretty badly injured, and when he was 97, he was in the hospital, and he had an after effect of anesthetic. And he lived through these few days of the First World War, and I was there, I watched. And the terror, his eyes would roll up and become white. We had to hire a nurse to sit with him for 3 days. He was so terrified, he thought the orderly was trying to steal his pocket watch and his money. So the war, although he didn't carry on a lot about it, certainly had a lasting effect. He was shot September 30th and taken to a field hospital. He lay in a foxhole for about 6 hours with a couple of dead buddies on top of him. They got him out, and I think after 7 hours, and they developed their hospital procedures much better than at Passchendaele and Vimy, and they were able to move a lot of the casualties out and quickly to England by this time. They perfected a lot of things. He was around the mustard gas, yes, but he had a good mask. He was certainly around the shelling. He got caught up in barbed wire, a lot of things. He very shortly after this ended up in England, and here we go. Dear Alice, this is about 9 days later. Just a few lines to tell you I'm still alive, but that's about it. The reason I didn't write was I was wounded and wasn't able to write and do much, but I'll try a few lines. Well, dear, I'm back in England, and believe me, I am glad. I got hit in the face, and I should be out for the winter. Got hit in the morning and stayed in a hole till 3 o'clock. I guess it'll be 6 or 8 months before I get away from here. I lost all my gold teeth and some more, and my face is disfigured. It went under my left eye and out through my nose, and I got 2 wounds in my right hand, and now I'm writing with my thumb and finger. I'm tired now and a little worried, but I wanted to send a short letter to you. I guess come over and nurse me, ha ha. He still kept a sense of humor. A few days later, dear Alice, just a few lines to tell you I'm still alive but not very good shape. I'm wounded twice in the right hand and arm and can't write. I've only 2 fingers I can use and a thumb and part of a finger. I'm writing this on my bed, so try and make it out. I'll write as often as I can and answer good, and I'm wounded in the face. I lost all my teeth, but thank God I have my eyesight. I ain't had any mail for some time from you, so I'm lonesome. He was transferred to Orpington. Orpington, there were 15,000 wounded Canadian soldiers treated there. And if you look at the panel at the back, you'll notice some of his postcards. It was a collection of huts. There were 20 wards and 52 beds. And they pioneered plastic surgery at Orpington. All the disfigured soldiers, they learned about plastic surgery. And Herm, of course, would have received a little bit of plastic surgery as well. Okay, big letter. This is 2 days after Armistice, November 13th, 1918. How Alice? No doubt you will think I've forgotten you. Reason I didn't write, my hand was in splints and I took them off to write the first time they were put on, and I'm not supposed to take them off. This is poor writing, for I ain't got any strength to hold the pencil, but I'll do my best. We ran away from the hospital last night and went to London, and there was a bonfire in the Strand last night, and there were 2,000 people staying up all night, singing, crying, laughing, and dancing. I just got back for breakfast. Well, dear, I guess we'll meet soon. I was booked for Canada last week, and I missed my board by being away, so I may not get home now for Christmas, but I hope I will. Got a bad scar on my face, and I'm getting gold teeth put in again. I don't know if I'll get them in here or not. My mouth ain't healed up too well. Alice, I don't suppose Billy saw any of the fighting, and I'm glad he didn't. I'm so happy I don't know how to hold myself. You should be in London. Everything shut down for 2 days, and you couldn't walk through the streets. There was people trampled to pieces. I ain't slept for 2 nights, and I'm all in. My mother will be happy now, and I hope Alice is. Just wait till I get back. Something. So Herm is in the process of being sent back. Just another page or two here. Orpington. Hi, Alice. I'll be pretty good, I hope, by the time I get back. Pretty near a whole year without anything, ha. Well, Alice, it's 6:30 now, and you see, I'm a pretty good boy to be in at night. The nurse says I'll be an old bachelor, but I don't think so. She thinks I'm an awful quiet man. She doesn't know me. I'll bet if she had me for one night, she'd think so, huh? Excuse me. I didn't mean to read that one. Elma's on another ward now. I don't see her too often. She's in a quarantine ward, so you see, I don't see her, but you shouldn't worry because she has an MO for a lover. She's a kid somehow. I ain't got any use for the Catholics. December 25th, we were all having supper together in the ward. We got some photos taken, and I'll bring you one so you can see how nice we had the ward fixed up with a Christmas tree and all. The sun shone nearly every day, and it's warm. We can go out without my overcoat. They're making my bridge now. I'm having gold teeth and 4 white teeth and a gold bridge put in. So you see, I have more gold now than I ever had before in my mouth. Well, I'll be on my way home soon. And he was shipped out January 9th, 1919 on a hospital ship. And there's a picture of it. It's called the Escobar or something like that. So he ships over, and next thing you hear, he's back in Kingston at the Queen's Military Hospital. Just a few lines to say hello, and how's Alice? Well, dearie, are you over your pouty spell yet? Well, I'm so damn sick of this place, I believe I'll go mad if they don't get me away from here. I suppose you're lonesome. You're not the only one who's lonesome. What's your idea of thinking I don't think as much of you as I used to? You're a foolish girl. I was down to Kennedy's for a couple of days. I'm up for more operations this week, but I don't think I'll let them operate on me. I'm afraid they'll cut some of the nerves. So I guess I'll leave well enough alone, and I'm going to try and get my discharge as soon as I can. I'm tired of living alone. Say us, they got me making a doll's carriage, some job, anything to keep us working. And his discharge comes from Kingston on March 9th, 1919. Dearest Alice, well, it's a snowy day here. I'll spend some of my time writing to you. I'm over in Berryfield waiting to get my train ticket. I thought I'd get it Monday, but our names aren't on the list for now. Say, Alice, I'm getting my new suit on Tuesday. It's costing me $60, some suit. I won't have to buy any when I ever get married, ha. Well, Alice, I'm getting so damn lonesome to see you every day. I stay up here. Seems like a year to me. I was down with you today. And at that point, Herm is released. He goes back to work at the making cheese boxes, and they're married 2 months later in March of 1919. They stayed married 62 years. Herm did become a canalman at Newborough in 1920 because of his war service. They were giving those jobs to canalmen who'd served in the war, and the same for Wayne's father, Alfie. Also received a position on the locks. Montpern did. And so did Joni Whalen. More. That's right. Yeah. A lot of the canalmen were veterans from the war. And Herm later became Lockmaster Chafee's, where he lived the rest of his life till he died at the age of 98. And that's the end.
Diane Haskins in Flanders Fields. In Flanders Fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row, that mark their place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields.
Neil Patterson to the stand, but if you'd like to stand up and stretch for a minute, that's fine. Research for us.
Begin, there's something here I would like to mention. You have heard all three speakers that were on earlier talking about the person who was in command here in Elgin, and when it was set up, the person that was called in to take over and actually run things for the municipality. Because as you know, there's nothing different today than it was then. The federal government claimed what they were going to do. They passed it on to the county to do it, and the county then passed it down to the township. And it was the township basically that did the initial setup in all across the province of the county battalions that were established. And when they brought the first man into Elgin area to do the first setup for it, they brought in the gentleman that all three have mentioned. His name was Harry Augustus Kuhn, and I would like to say that his daughter has driven here from Toronto today to be with us. Please stand up, Elizabeth.
It's Henry instead of Harry. Henry Augustus Kuhn.
Well, he signed it. Henry in the Assassination papers, was he trying to evade the income tax?
Anyway, he was known as Gus.
I will not go into the details about how the war began, as I'm sure that you have all heard the story of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. This brought into action the alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, and the other triple alliance, England, France, and Russia, who began to square off against each other. I think this is going to drive us nuts.
You were just sideways of it.
Was the only avenue. World War I, the war to end all wars, because of a treaty of protection with Belgium, Britain gave Germany a declaration of intent. When the German army entered Belgium, the British Prime Minister gave them until August 4th, 1914 to get out of Belgium. With the German army still in Belgium at 1 minute past midnight on August 5th, war was declared. The legitimacies of the Dominion meant that Canada was automatically at war with Germany. However, Canadian Prime Minister Robert Borden following a vote in the House of Commons, signed Canada's declaration of war on August the 5th, 1914. Canada's sacrifices and contributions to the war would change this country forever. The war enabled Canada to become more independent while opening a deep rift between the English and the French-speaking population. I'm sorry about this, but created the greater part of the Liberal Party in Ontario. For the first time in history, Canadian forces fought with distinct units under the command of British commanders and then under a Canadian-born commander. Canadians of British descent gave widespread support, arguing that Canadians had a duty to fight on behalf of the motherland. At that time, Canada had a small permanent standing army of 3,110 men. An order was issued as a result of the declaration that an army was to be recruited for overseas service. Mass mobilization was to develop a completely new land force, the Canadian Expeditionary Force. This new army was to be based on numbered battalions raised through cities and municipalities. Thus was created the 156th Leeds Grenville Battalion. Companies were raised and trained in specific locations across Canada as volunteers came forward in large numbers. Now, I want you to try and visualize this. We had immediately 100,000 people across Canada came forward initially. We had never produced anything in kind of quantities that were going to be needed. The Ross rifle was the rifle that was been established as the rifle that the military were going to use. Well, they couldn't produce them as fast as the men were coming forward. If you look at pictures back here, you'll see the soldiers marching in the streets of Elgin, and only half of them have a weapon. They just couldn't produce the armament. They couldn't produce machine guns to train them on fast enough. They couldn't produce anything fast enough. You'll also find that people in the same platoon are wearing two different hats. That's because somebody's got an old hat on and somebody's got one of the new ones that they made. That was how fast they were trying to keep up to the volunteers that were happening. There had been earlier volunteers who had left the area to sign up in Ottawa and Berryfield. Still others signed up with specific regiments, like Peter Martin, who joined the HCMR, Martin Beadle, who joined the 104th Regiment and left with the first contingents of overseas troops. The units that were already in France and Belgium soon needed replacements, and the Leeds Grenville provided volunteers who were sent to the camp at Whitley, England. 100 years ago, at the end of October 1914, 33,000 Canadian troops landed in Europe. The first Battle of Epa. Now, there's a word. It's a little town in Belgium, and over there they call it Epa. Canadians, and mainly Americans, call it Eves. Ron referred to it as he had found out that in Britain they call it Wipers. But it's Y-P-R-E-S, and the town itself in Belgium that I've been in is called Epa. But Epa had already had a battle that had taken place with the loss of thousands of British lives. Canadian troops arrived in time for the Allied offensive. These volunteers of the 1st Canadian Division were anxious to prove their loyalty to the Commonwealth. From the 3,000-man standing army on August the 14th to the 33,000-man going into battle at the end of October shows the patriotic fervor that existed in Canada. Thousands more men were volunteering every day and the ranks of the newly created country battalions were increasing with men who had the same anxious desire to prove their loyalties. The training facilities at most of these battalions were outgrowing the location that were originally chosen. The Leeds Grenville Battalion was no exception. The training establishment in Elgin had grown to the point where Lieutenant Gus Kuhn and his drill sergeant Richardson could not adequately cope with the numbers of raw recruits signing up. Divisional command in Brockville decided to set up training locations in Delta and in Westport. Lieutenant Lloyd Scott, formerly from Athens, and the newly promoted drill sergeant Wilfred Fredenberg began to establish the facility in Westport. At the same time, Lieutenant Weston Pitt and drill sergeant Charles LaFleur were set up in the training facility in Delta. By mid-spring, the two locations were providing training for the area. Now, I try to give you an idea here in Elgin what was taking place with all these men coming in from outside. They were coming, and as Sue mentioned, they were actually coming from Frontenac County as well, because you had people from Fermoy and Burridge coming in to sign up here. But they ended up with a total that were signed that developed through Bastard, South Crosby, North Crosby, the incorporated villages of Westport and Newborough, where 126 men came from that to come in for the training program by the time that they were all, and they were brought in on Thursdays for rifle training into this area, even though they were still had their detachment in Westport and Newborough where they received basic training. There was not enough Ross rifles. The Ross rifles were stored over in the Orange Hall, where the men that came in here to use them slept on the Thursday nights and the Wednesday night before they arrived. And they went out into a field that had been arranged for by the municipality of South Crosby with a man by the name of Philip Holiday, which was the property adjacent to the school property. And they set up a big bunker of which you can take a metal detector today and go over and it will just go wild with the amount of lead that's in that hill from where they set it up. But then they set up the area on this side of the school as a parade square. And actually in the first fall, on the first month in the fall when they were training, they marched all the grass off this field. And it became a mud bath. But as I had heard later, there was great training for the fellows that were going over to Belgium and France because they were going to live in that same mud for the next 2 or 3 years. So that you have the students in this school, as Wayne has mentioned, looking out the window and watching these people that are marching out of this parade square and through the village of Elgin. There's one picture back there on that black board of the entire 126 men of this area as they marched down the main street in Elgin. There were those whose patriotism could not wait and wished to get to the war as soon as possible. They joined already existing units, men such as Robert Kane and George Wing of Westport, who were killed in action, and Peter Martin, wounded at Epa. Dozens of men answered this patriotic call and went overseas with the first units that left Canada. By the end of the war, there were over 200 volunteers from Bastard, North Crosby, South Crosby, the village of Westport, and the village of Newborough, plus the odd few that came in from other areas like in the area adjacent to Westport in Frontenac County and Lanark County. So that you visualize that number of men that come out of here that went, and the population at that time, and figure out what it was. It was 100 years ago last week that the Canadian 2nd Division joined with the British to take the city of Epa. The 2nd Division was made up of many brigades from eastern and central Ontario. One of these, the 21st Brigade, was where many of the early volunteers from North Leeds first encountered the horrifying truth about World War I. Martin Beadle of North Crosby was caught in the first mustard gas attack by the Germans and lived the rest of his life with the scars. After the war, he moved to Elgin, and I remember him well when my father hired him to do some weeding in our garden, as other people around Elgin did. He would take off his shirt and expose these horrible burns that were over the upper part of his body from the gas attacks. If anyone else entered the garden, he quickly put his shirt back on, as he thought he was ashamed of what he looked like after serving for us and getting these burns. The battles in France and Belgium continued, and the trench warfare, as it was called, moved very little. Epa occupied a strategic position during World War I because it stood in the path the Germans planned to sweep across Belgium and into France. Many of the Canadian troops spent the entire war in Epa, Passchendaele, Vimy, and Flanders area. To put this in perspective, it was like staying in an area bounded by Crosby, Forfair, Philsfield, Morton, and Elgin. That was the size of the area that I referred to that were these battles. And there were 4 battles of Epa, Passchendaele, Vimy, and Flanders, and that size of an area. To this, in perspective, I would like to suggest slept in it. They ate it. Some of the pictures that you see, I have a picture I just love back here of Everett Cross he lived on the Hutchings Road, just out of Newbury. And he's sitting there, and you'd think that, it was the greatest place in the world. He's up to his knees in mud, he's sitting on a mud embankment, and he's got his pipe in his mouth, and he's sitting there relaxed. Well, that's the way he sat for days and days until he moved out. He even ate his meals sitting in that same spot. When they were brought up through these tunnels and provided to them, they ate their meals in that same spot. Now, it's very difficult for us to visualize just what it was like. And when Sue was reading her grandfather's letters, he really never touched. He mentioned about being in, the place that he was in France where he stayed, but he never touched on how really bad it was, and how sick the men got from the fact that all kinds of problems, like for instance, they tried to make them keep their feet dry, but in that kind of mud, it was really difficult because your boots and your socks were always soaked. So you had these problems with your feet, and it was just continuous. You lived in that mud and there'd be slop where people went to the bathroom, not very far away from it, so you ended up by getting dysentery. And all of these things compounding in these trenches that existed. And then when you went over the top to attack the Germans, which were only from here down to Perth Street, or to Kingston Street, that distance that you were making, you got shot at with rifles, the 50 caliber machine guns that they fired so many bullets they had water-cooled cylinders on them, and mortars, and then the artillery would bombard you as you tried to cross this area. And that's why the losses were so high. I'll try to give you some example of what was taking place in this sort of, and I'll stick strictly to the Epa area. I won't try and expand it beyond, but Epa area was where there was about 1.5 million men in that little area, from here to Morton. So the Canadian Corps was formed from the Canadian Expeditionary Force in September 1950.
After arriving the 2nd Canadian Division in France, the soldiers of the Corps were mostly volunteers, as conscription was not implemented until actually the end of 1917. The Corps was expanded by additions of the 3rd Canadian Division in December, arriving in 1915, the 4th Canadian Division arriving in 1916. The organization of the 5th Canadian Division began in February of 1917, but it was broken up. The entire division was broken up to supply replacements for all the people who had been killed. And that's what happened to the 156th Leeds Grenville Battalion. It was broken up to provide for 3 other units. Although the Corps was within and under command of the British Army, there was considerable pressure among Canadian leaders, especially following the Battle of the Somme, for the Corps to fight as a single unit rather than spreading the divisions through the whole army. Original command by Lieutenant General Sir A.E.H. Alderson until 1960. Command was passed to Lieutenant General Sir Julian Byng later, Lord Byng of Vimy, and the Governor General of Canada. When Lord Byng was promoted to a higher command in the summer of 1917, he was succeeded by the commander of the Canadian 1st Division, General Sir Arthur Currie, was given command of the whole of the Canadian Army. Now, that is a very important point in the history of this country. It was our first step where we had said to the British, we're not kids, we can look after ourselves, we can do it ourselves. And the command of the Canadian Army was taken over by General Currie. And actually, it was a good thing because he started to provide a little more for the Canadians than had been, because the Brits decided that the Australians and the Canadians were great cannon fodder. And what they did was, when they attacked, the Australians and the Canadians were the first wave that went over this wall and headed for the German lines, and mainly through barbed wire, with all the machine guns blasting them and so on. So Currie ended up by changing that slightly, and he put the Canadians in a position where they were a much better fighting force and held together and not used as cannon fodder. I'll give you an idea of some of the battles that had. We had New Chapelle. The Canadian Expeditionary Force saw the first battle in March 1915 in the French town of New Chapelle. After arriving from Salisbury Plain, the Canadian forces were instructed to prevent the Germans from reinforcing the sector of New Chapelle. This would allow the British First Army under General Thomas Haig to successfully push through the German line and establish a new Allied front on the conquered territory. Again, that sounds really impressive, that they were going to push through the German line and they were going to establish a new front. Well, it was about from here to the high school. That was the distance, and that was for the new front. Although the British were unable to exploit their advantage due to poor communications, it taught the Canadians that artillery bombardment was too light to suppress the enemy trenches, and that better artillery observation points were necessary, that reserves were too few to follow up and succeed after the battle to hold the position, and that the transmission of orders was inadequate. And if everyone here just thinks for a minute, in that particular point of time, the Canadians established in Kingston at the Royal Canadian School of Signals the better communications, which actually finished up. By the time the war was over, some of what had been learnt in Kingston was over in Europe. The Second Battle of Epa. In the first week of April 1915, the soldiers of the 1st Canadian Division were moved to reinforce the salient where the British Allied line pushed into the German line in a concave blend. There I said was a little hump. That's where the Canadians originally were put under the British command. That's where they were set out to control things. So anyhow, on April 22nd, the Germans sought to eliminate this salient by using poison gas. Following an intensive artillery bombardment, they released 160 tons of chlorine gas from cylinders dug into the forward edge of their trenches into a light northwest wind, the first use of chlorine gas in the war. As thick clouds of yellow-green chlorine drifted over their trenches, the French colonial defense and the British colonial forces on either side of the Canadians crumbled, and the troops, completely overcome by the terrible weapon, died and broke and fled, leaving a gap of 4 miles wide on either side of the Allied lines. The Canadians were the only division who stayed put and held the line. Although all through the night the Canadians fought to close the gap, and on April 24th the Germans launched another poison gas attack, this time directly at the Canadian line. In the 48 hours of the battle, the Canadians suffered over 6,000 casualties. 1 man in every 3 was dead of the wounded. The Battle of the Somme. The next area where Canadians fought was the Battle of the Somme from the latter half of 1916, initially launched as a campaign to relieve pressure from the beleaguered French forces at the Battle of Verdun. The Allied casualties actually exceeded those of Verdun. The battle began on July 1st, 1916, and among the first troops to leave their trenches were the men of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. Newfoundland at the time was not a part of Canadian Confederation, but was considered a separate dominion. As a result, the Newfoundlanders advanced as part of the 29th Division, not the Canadian Corps. The attack went poorly for the Newfoundlanders. Results, massive casualties. Of the 801 men that made up the regiment the day before, only 68 reported back from the battle. Every officer who had gone over the top was killed. The Canadian Corps entered the battle in September when it was tasked to secure the small town of Courcelette in France. In the major objective, which began at dawn September 15th, the Canadian Corps on the extreme left of the attack assaulted 2,200-yard sector of the west village of Courcelette. By November the 11th, the 4th Canadian Division finally secured most of the German trenches and then rejoined the Canadian Corps at Vimy Ridge. The Battle of the Somme claimed more than 24,000 Canadian casualties, but it also gave Canadian units the reputation for a formidable assault force. The British Prime Minister, Lloyd George, wrote, "The Canadians played a part of such distinction that thenceforth they were marked out as the shock troops. For the remainder of the war, they were brought along to head up assaults on major or great battles." When the Germans found the Canadian Corps coming into the line they had prepared, they thought the worst. The Battle of Vimy Ridge. For the first time, all 4 Canadian divisions were to be assembled to operate in combat as a corps. The Canadian Division was joined by the British 5th Infantry Division and reinforced by artillery, engineers, and labour units. The Canadian Corps was supported the north by 24th British Division of the 1st Corps and advanced north to the river and then attacked to the south. The attack began at 5:43 a.m. on Easter Monday, April the 9th, 1917, whereupon artillery pieces at the disposal of the Canadian Corps began firing. Light field guns laid down a barrage which advanced in precedent of the increments of 100 yards every 3 minutes, with a minimum of heavy howitzer establishing a standing barrage further ahead, known as a defensive system. The 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Canadian Divisions reported reaching and capturing their objective, the Black Line, at 6:25 a.m. The 4th Canadian Division encountered a great deal of trouble in its advance and was unable to complete its first objective until some hours later. After a planned pause in which positive positions were consolidated, the advance resumed. Shortly after 7 a.m., the 1st Canadian Division had taken off its second objection, the Red Line. The move a brigade forward to mount an attack on the remainder. The 2nd Canadian Division reported reaching the Red Line and capturing the town of Trelew at approximately the same time. Units of the 3rd Canadian Division reached a sector of the Red Line around 7 a.m. However, due to an exposed left flank caused by the failure of the 4th Canadian Division to capture the top of the ridge, the 3rd Canadian Division was forced to stop and establish a divisional defensive flank to its north. It was not until 11 a.m. that the defending German 79th Reserve Division mounted a counterattack, by which time only the 4th Canadian Division had not reached its objectives. 3 fresh brigades were moved up to the Red Line, and by 9:30 a.m. April 10th, to support the advance, whereupon they leapfrogged existing units occupying the Red Line and advanced to the Blue Line. By approximately 11 a.m., the Blue Line, including the hill 135 and the town of Trelew, had been captured. The advance briefly halted, and the artillery barrage remained stationary for 90 minutes to give the troops time to consolidate themselves along the Blue Line. Shortly after 1 p.m., the advance recommended by the Brown Line being secured around 2 p.m. By this point, only the northern half of Hill 145, the Pimple, a fortified gun point outside of Vimy, remained under German control. Fresh troops finally forced the remaining German troops to the northern half of Hill 145 at around 3:15 p.m. and by nightfall on the 10th of April. The only objective not achieved by the capture of the Pimple, supported by a significant amount of artillery, and the 24th British Division and 1st Corps to the north, and the 10th Canadian Brigade attacked and hastily entrenched where the German troops had previously been at the Pimple. By nightfall on the 12th of April, the Canadian Corps was firmly in control of the ridge. The Corps had suffered 10,602 casualties, 3,598 killed, and 7,004 wounded. The German 6th Army suffered an unknown number of casualties and was approximate 4,000 men becoming prisoners of war. 4 Victorious Crosses, the highest military distinction awarded to the British and Commonwealth forces for valor, were awarded. The Germans did not attempt to recapture the ridge. Even in the spring, when the offensive was at a standstill, the Germans remained away from the ridge. Now, I must tell you, that is where the PPCLI went when they left France. Then, at the Battle of Passchendaele, the 4 divisions of the Canadian Corps were transferred to the Epa salient and asked with making additional advances on Passchendaele. The Canadian Corps relieved the 2nd Anzio Corps, and on the 18th of October, from their position along the valley between Gravenfield Ridge and the heights of Passchendaele. Interestingly, it was actually the same front as had been occupied by the 1st Canadian Division back in April of 1915. The Canadian Corps operation was to be executed in a series of 3 attacks, each with limited objectives, delivered at intervals of 3 or more days. As the Canadian Corps positioned was directly south of the inter-army boundary between the British 5th and 2nd Army. The British 5th Army would mount subsequent operations on the Canadians' left, and the Anzac Corps would advance to protect the Canadians' right. The execution date of the phases was tentatively the 26th of October, 30th of October, and the 6th of November. The final stages began on the morning of the 26th. The 3rd Canadian Division was assigned the northern flank, which included a sharp rising ground on the Bellevue Spar, south of Ravenbrook Creek. The 4th Canadian Division would take the declining corps that straddled the Roulon River. The 3rd Canadian Corps Division captured the Wolfe Corps and secured the objective line that was ultimately forced to drop a defensive flank and link up with the flanking division of the British 5th. The Canadian division initially captured all its objectives, but gradually retreated from the declining corps due to the German counterattack and miscommunication between the Canadian and Australian units. The final successful action to gain the high ground north of the village and the vicinity of Hill 52 was launched November the 11th. This attack on the 11th of November brought to an end the long drawn-out 3rd Battle of Epa, the 2nd Battle of Passchendaele, and the Canadian Corps had 15,652 casualties, over 4,000 dead in the 16 days of fighting. Then came the 100 days of war, the final 100 days of the war. Throughout these 3 final months, the Canadian troops sought action in several areas. The first was near the enemy salient on August 2nd, when the Canadian Corps, along with the New Zealanders, Australians, French and British, were charged with the task of spearheading an assault on the German forces at Amiens. In the subsequent battle, the morale of the British force was badly shaken. In Ludendorff words, the Battle of the Ardennes was a black day for the German army. After their breakthrough at Ardennes, the Canadians were shifted back to Ardennes and given the task of cracking the Hindenburg line. Between April 26 and September 2nd, the Canadian Corps launched multiple attacks on the German front. At Canal du Nord, on September 27, 1918, the Canadian forces broke through the Hindenburg line by smashing through a dry section of the Canal du Nord. The operation ended in triumph on October the 11th, 1918, when the Canadian forces drove the Germans out of their main distribution center in the Battle of Cambrai. In the final of 100 days of war, the Canadian Corps marched successfully to Mons. However, in this period, the Canadian Corps suffered 46,000 casualties. The last Canadian to be killed was George Lawrence Price. 2 minutes before the armistice took place at 11 a.m. on November the 11th, he was traditionally recognized as being the last soldier in the war to be killed, the war to end all wars. And I might tell you, Ron, that this gentleman did not live far from where you live. Across the canal on the other side in just north of Smith Falls. And he was the last man killed in the war. Now, I would ask, after hearing all of those casualties and all of those people that were killed and maimed during the war, I would ask that all of you now stand while we pay recognition to the 23 men that Steve mentioned from Bastard, South Crosby, North Crosby, and the villages, incorporated villages of Newborough and Westport. And Charles Board, Frederick Board, Charles John Bryden, Charles Myers Cannon, Kenneth Hobart Kane, William Carroll, Gilbert Monique Clinton, Everett Cross, James William Edgers, Samuel Benjamin Green, Martin James Flynn, David Hurley, Leonard James Judge, William J. Joint, Robert Andrew Kane, Albert O'Mara, Frederick Clarence Raisin, James Weathley Rathwell, Lloyd James Scott, Lieutenant, Arthur Hopkins Tent, William Truelove, George Earl Wing, Lyndon Delorma Wood, and Harold George Young. Those gentlemen are now somewhere in France or Belgium, and some we know not where they are buried. We know not under what trench they lie. But I'd ask all of you if you would give thanks to those who did not return. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. I just have a few announcements left. First of all, I'd like to mention that yesterday we had the elementary school students, grades 4, 5, and 6, coming over to see the exhibit, and they were entranced. They were delighted and thrilled, because of course they have no experience with this. In the afternoon, we had the grade 10 history class from the high school coming to visit. They were also very interested. And I want to call your attention to the silhouettes at the back. These were done by the art students at Rito District High School with the help of their teacher. It's a great added dramatic structure to our event. Thank you to all of you for coming out today, and to our honored guests for coming and speaking, and the musicians. Thank you to the Rito Lakes Library for the exhibit at the back. I also want to mention that at the back there is an exhibit, an only small exhibit from the Museum of Healthcare in Kingston, which is associated with Queens and KGH. And out of that I have information from, thank you from Libby Kuhn Henson for information about her Aunt Eva, who was a volunteer nurse in the war. And members of the Heritage Society, thank you for all your hard work. Thank you. Come again.